Well, I must begin by thanking the organizers for having me here. I shan't say more, since I have only 10 minutes. Well, I suppose after the relatively good news, we have bad news from Asia. Bad news from Asia because of the fact that inequality, associated, of course, with relatively high rates of growth in some countries, extremely high rates in some, is the news story in Asia. It's the news story because of the fact that if you go back to the early miracles, in particular a country like South Korea, the understanding was that Asia was characterized by two tendencies. One, it had a process of growth in which, through state intervention and a pursuit of a mercantilist strategy which targeted international markets, you not only registered high growth, but in time, after a period of profit inflation, what you actually saw was a part of the surpluses being used to, in various ways, including through access to education, to actually redistribute income, such that if you look at it over a period of time, you do see that at the bottom there was a significant improvement in standards of living over a period of time, so that it appeared as if the early miracles in particularly South Korea and Taiwan in Asia were able to combine growth with some degree of benefits to the lower deciles of the population, the poorer sections of the population. The second thing was that Asia is, of course, well known for the fact that over a period of time, including in recent decades, there's been a significant reduction in poverty, which is the incidence of income poverty, measured, well, normally in terms of $1.25 a day, PPP terms. And we have something like 700 million people who have been taken out of poverty over the last 2 decades or so. So the ratio was actually seen as, even in recent times, as being a continent which has been able to deliver to the lower deciles of the population some of the benefits of growth. However, the moment we begin to look at inequality estimates, and there are two kinds of estimates now which people talk about. The first, of course, is income or expenditure inequality. Countries like India, for example, don't have income surveys. We have consumer expenditure surveys. So it's inequality estimates using the Gini coefficient to look at inequality based on consumption surveys. And what you find is that if you take the period of the early 1990s and go on to the late 2000s, there's been, in country after country, a significant increase in the Gini, pointing to the fact that expenditure as a proxy for income is reflecting an increase in inequality in periods in which there have been more countries which have come on to the high growth trajectory. As you know, if perhaps outside of the Vatican, the one place where we have, innumerable number of miracles is Asia, because miracles keep moving. You've first had South Korea and Taiwan, then you had people talking about the second-tier industrializers like Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia being miracles. Then we had China and India. Now they say it's going to be Cambodia and Vietnam. But basically, as you look at the more recent trajectory of high growth, what you actually observe is that in terms of the Gini, there's been a significant increase in inequality. But more startling, however, has been the increase in wealth inequality. Take, for example, there are two countries which seem to be not too badly off on this front, which is China and Korea. But all the other reasonable or high performers in the Asian continent fall in the high inequality, the very high inequality, wealth inequality spectrum. Take a country like India. We had something like, if these wealth estimates are right, we had the top 1% of the population having something like 36% of total wealth in the 1990s, or the end of the 1990s. And now in 2014, or 2013, 2014, what we have is that 1% has got something like 48% of total wealth in a country like India. So when you look at it in terms of wealth inequality, in fact, it seems to be even more unequal, a much sharper level of inequality. Quickly, what could possibly explain this? Now, if you turn to an organization like, let's say, the Asian Development Bank, they point to three kinds of tendencies which could account for inequality. One is putting the blame in the wrong place. They say technology, because of the fact that these countries have, in the period of globalization, allowed cross-border flows of capital and technology, so that what you're actually seeing is that despite the fact that they have surplus labor and relatively low wages, you have extremely capital-intensive technologies being put in place in order for them to be successful exporters. And therefore, it is argued that this results in a situation where, because capital intensity means larger surpluses out of a given level of value of output, that you would have high inequality. But the fact of the matter is, one of the benefits of late industrialization is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can actually go to the international shelf of blueprints and pick up new technologies. And therefore, if you take a country like South Korea, for example, when it industrialized, it used recent date technologies, the frontier technologies of that point of time, and it actually was not stuck with a situation where it actually saw huge levels of unemployment and associated with it high levels of inequality, particularly wealth inequality. So what you need, therefore, is if you're a late industrializer, you need to ensure that you have a rate of growth and a composition of output where, despite the capital intensity of technology, you end up with a situation where you get the benefits of a relatively significant responsiveness of employment to output growth, and that actually allows you to use the surpluses which come out of these more productive technologies to get a degree of equality. Now, the point is, what is preventing these countries, which are seeing, well, reasonably high rates of growth, from doing this? One of the things associated with the post-1997, the period after the 1997 crisis, is that across countries, what you observe is that there is an excess of savings over investment in a number of countries in Asia. Asian countries are accumulating foreign exchange reserves to insure themselves against the kind of crisis that we saw in 1997, very often investing them in dollar-denominated assets held in the United States, including treasury bonds of the US. And therefore, you're ending up with a situation where there is an implicit deflationary fiscal stance, a contractionary fiscal stance being adopted by government, where they are not exploiting to the full the surpluses that they have, implying, therefore, an excess of savings over investment. So that results in a situation where you're not able to combine the utilization of recent date technologies with high rates of growth, and therefore you cannot get for yourself this adjustment. The other is that associated with globalization has been a significant increase, despite the experience of the 1997 crisis, of inflows into these countries of large volumes of foreign finance, particularly into their stock and property markets. So we have the stock market boom and property market boom. A country like India, for example, abolished capital gains taxation so long as you hold your investment for at least 365 days. In essence, you created in your stock market a tax haven. And when you have large inflows of that kind, you have asset price inflation. And when you have asset price inflation, both in property markets and stock markets, there are few, because these wealth estimates include not only real assets, but also financial assets, and of course, property. You end up with this situation of extremely high inequality. So globalization, in the sense of inducing a deflationary fiscal policy combined with new technologies, plus allowing for this kind of large cross-border financial flows, seems to underlie, very briefly put, this tendency towards very intense wealth inequality in countries which otherwise are considered high-growth countries. Thank you.